This past weekend we had Trials Labs, a test game mode involving actual zones that would come up while playing early into the round in Trials of Osiris. And I saw there was a lot of discussion about this, but I wanted to provide my own feedback of how this played out and where Trials kind of went wrong. I'm gonna try and be concise with this video as best as I can, but it might turn out to be a longer one, but let's get started. Firstly, let's start by talking about the state of current Elim, the normal Elim, not Trials Labs. I think this game mode is very mediocre and outdated. It has no real game flow, and it relies on you just wanting to find engagements to be the reason to push, and this becomes pretty problematic. Granted, there's been some really great sandbox changes that have made this play a lot better recently, things like not respawning with special ammo, and the timer for rounds being shorter. I think these are small but significant changes for the game mode, but it still isn't exactly great. While I won't put the blame on only the game mode, we've seen a lot of cases in the past where things become very problematic simply because there is no reason to push. One of the biggest offenders is sitting and waiting for your super with 10 intellect because you have no real reason to engage. You can just hold and wait on your super, especially when you're at a disadvantage, to try and even the playing field. Another massive offender is sniper rifles. Playing smart in this game mode a lot of the time relies on you just waiting for your enemy team to get impatient. So they want to peek first, you get the first pick, you get the pick, secure the orb, it snowballs, you get advantage, you win the round. While I often say sitting in the back of the map might not do anything, not every map actually punishes you for that. Sure, there are some maps, which I regard as good, that reward you for getting inside control, but that leads to another issue I'll talk about in a moment. But other maps really do allow you to set up in a strong way where you are just waiting to get that pick with a sniper while covering pretty much every angle. Then another fault on the game mode is on the maps that you do get map control on. They allow you to, yes, win mid and exert pressure by doing so, but the other team really has no reason to push you on that advantageous positioning. So a lot of the time, they'll just kind of sit, try and get someone out of position, or wait until they find someone out of position, get that pick, and then push up. Or better yet, do that with a sniper rifle. And if your team's playing really smart, well, it might just go the distance where you are just sitting there doing nothing, waiting for zone because the other team isn't going to push you because they realize they've lost map control. Which I think is also a pretty frustrating experience, being the team that decided to push up and gain control of the map. And since the radar gives you so much information, if you are playing more passively, or rather you don't really have a reason to push a lot of the time, you can sit there and just read the radar and know exactly where the enemy team is waiting to push you from, and that creates even more stalemates when, of course, both teams, if they're playing smart, decide to do that. This also limits the ability to flank because there's significantly less things to keep track of in the moment, and there's not pressure to move or do more things. You just see the information and you can react to it very easily. All of this leads to game modes feeling very stalematey, lacking flow, and just incredibly linear when it just evolves into people reading the radar. As much as Destiny isn't some esports competitive design game per se, I don't think this should stop us from wanting something that plays better and is inherently more competitive. Because at the end of the day, in a PvP environment, player versus player, where the goal is to win, especially in something like Trials, it is inherently competitive. And while Destiny might not be the mecca of skill and the esports title of our generation, I don't think it should stop us, or we should use that as an excuse as to why it can't produce a little bit more competitive gameplay, at least in my opinion. So this leads us to, why does Trials need an objective? Well, having an objective solves a lot of the problems that I just mentioned. The stalemates, the way that Destiny's core gameplay, unfortunately, without a reason to move, becomes very stalematey and very frustrating at times. So why does Trials need an objective of some sort? Well, this would solve a lot of the problems, in my opinion, that I explained. It would force people to push. And if you do push and gain map control effectively, the other team actually has to answer back. They can't just sit and wait. You are at an actual advantage now for controlling the map and controlling the general area of the zone. So the other team that wasn't as successful either will lose or has to think of some way to answer back and retake the map control. This also creates game flow because you know that people are going to be pushing different areas with the zone in mind. There's going to be different strategies, but you know the overall focal point is going to be gaining control of that zone area. This doesn't limit players from going in other places, taking flanks, etc., but again, it gives you an idea of what to keep in mind and what you might need to anticipate while maintaining a good degree of unpredictability. In fact, I'd argue that flanks become a little bit more value and have some good risk reward to it. In the normal Elim game mode, it's really just find the one person alone and dive them or get that sniper pick on them, whereas with an objective, a player can make the decision to try and go for a flank behind enemy players or an off angle, which is risky because they're leaving their main players to take care of staying alive and contesting map control, but can be very rewarding because they can get the jump on players also on the enemy team trying to contest map control and are less aware of that because there's more things to actually keep track of. Then the other thing is that if players do want to try and collapse on that player flanking, they have to leave the center of the map or give up potentially map control to attempt to kill the player on the flank, which again, this makes a lot more interesting decision making and a lot of risk reward play all around. And strategy, in my opinion. I talked about snipers being somewhat stalematy in normal Elim. With an objective present, they're far from useless, but they can't just sit back and thrive on your own curiosity to try and peek them and get a quick pick. They can't just sit and wait for you to make the mistake anymore. They need to push the advantage of what a sniper rifle can do. This means challenging initial lanes to try and get a very early advantage that could very quickly sway the round. Or a sniper can do something I call cutting the map, which is essentially cutting off a place where enemies would want to push on their way to an objective, and they can do that from a safe angle. So they can watch an angle where the enemy would likely be pushing from and cut that off completely. So I think snipers are still very, very strong. They just can't sit back and wait for you to peek them anymore. Having an objective present can also affect your ability usage and present some pretty interesting decision-making risk reward for that. I saw a lot of people talking about how you can kind of fortress up on the objective. You can put barricades down, rifts, and especially the stag rift. You can put down glacier grenades. And yeah, while I think this does exemplify some of the pain points of the current sandbox, I think those things can be fixed, and I don't think this is actually an effective strategy. I think with the zone present, it does give you some interesting decision making, like I mentioned, of when to use your abilities. You can do it pretty much one of two times, if we want to say this to simplify it. You can use your abilities and your grenades early on to establish early map presence and control so you can have a better chance to win the round, or you try to win map control just with team shooting and pushing up, getting good damage. And if you do win just using your guns and putting in good damage, pushing up, you can use your utility to quote unquote fortress up on the zone and get clear control of it. Or if you lose doing that and the other team succeeds where you lost and is trying to fortress up, you save your utility to throw at their quote unquote fortress on the zone. There are plenty of zoning grenades in Destiny, and now you can utilize them to neutralize advantage a little bit more. You can make the counterpoint that there's too many abilities that are active too much over the match to actually make this happen in practice. I think that's a fair criticism. However, I wanted to read an excerpt from a previous TWAB. This is from the 8/26/2021 TWAB. It reads, "In the coming weeks, you'll hear about changes we're making to how players regenerate ability energy and how those changes are going to affect PvE and PvP with our 30th anniversary release. A few examples of changes in the pipe: a reduction to how many one-shot kill abilities are available in the Crucible, and shifting super energy regeneration so players are rewarded for participating in combat versus waiting for a timer." The key thing I want to outline here is that they're actually looking to make changes on how players regenerate ability energy. I believe this was also talked about on the Firing Range podcast, where we had Kevin and Chris join us and they talked about the idea of this. While we don't know what this looks like, I believe it's on their radar. So I think the game mode having a solid foundation of how it plays and how competitive it is a great start and shouldn't be compromised because of the sandbox. Whereas these things that I would argue are still problems outside of an objective-based trials should be addressed either way and can be addressed in the future. I saw a good amount of teams over the weekend just kind of hopping on zone together and trying to fortress up, and I think having a zone present in trials emphasizes really good positioning, and it actually rewards good positioning in my opinion. Let's take Javelin as an example. I don't want to use Wormhaven over the weekend because I have some issues with the zone placement that I'll talk about later in this implementation of Trials Labs, Zone Trials, whatever it was called, but let's take a hypothetical Javelin with a zone. I'm gonna put the zone, if I had to say, good placement would be in the middle of the map around where heavy spawns. This is an area that is not often used. It is usually disadvantageous because it doesn't have a lot of cover, and I'll talk about why we'd want a zone there in the future. But in my ideal setting, that is where I'd put the zone. So on this very rough image, I have a yellow line dividing the map in half to kind of show the halfway point. I used red for where the zone is, and the blue X's are the players where if you spawned blue or fuel, whatever you want to call it, I call it blue, where you'd want to be controlling, putting pressure on the enemy team that spawned red, or generators, or C, whatever you want to call it. When you're playing with a zone or objective, you don't want to get your whole team and try and pile up on it or fortress up. You are giving up map control and so many angles you're going to be vulnerable to. So for me, the blue X's show what ideal map control would look like if you spawned blue or A or fuel and you were putting pressure again on C or red. This would have one player playing on the zone, one player in the diamond, that's where it says the inner ring, that little entrance by the stairs, I call that diamond, and then one player by rocket. Those two positions of the other players not on the zone are very, very safe angles. They're very strong power positions because they have a lot of angles to cut off players from pushing the player on the zone while being in safe angles and having a lot of cover themselves to work with. The player on the diamond's especially important because if they try and push from stairs or get an angle on the stairs to look at the person on the objective player can sit behind kind of the boxes and play around that or play around some cover, while the person on the diamond will stop them from being able to push the person on the zone for free. It will effectively give them a harder time and stop them from being able to contest zone. This is what map control means. So you would actually have to kill the player on diamond or take control of diamond and be in a lot better of a position to push the zone. That's where you have the person on rocket that can either hop up on those little boxes there and get a sight line to stairs as well, thus working with the player on diamond, or that other player can loop around and look around the heavy spawn if they're approaching from outside. You have angles on everything and can cover your zone player while being very difficult to break because those two active angles on rocket and diamond are preventing enemies from pushing each other as well. This is what map control looks like. If you were to not do this and just hop on zone, you're giving up all these angles, you're letting them push with the entire map and all the angles in the world for free towards the zone. So that is why that's not an effective strategy in my opinion, even if you are trying to fortress up with all the myriads of kind of very strong abilities to protect yourself in this game right now. So having an objective present really rewards a team for gaining map control and having good position a lot more adequately than normal Elim would, where this is still somewhat of a good thing, but isn't as nearly as rewarding and doesn't put nearly as much pressure for the team that failed to do this. Finally, in regards to why Trials needs an objective, I wanted to talk about the 1vx scenarios. So I think that this is really interesting, and this gives a lot more depth to those 1vx or 2vx scenarios. While it is harder to 1vx, or let's say 1v3, because you don't have all the time in the world to pressure players into peeking you, I would argue that a lot of the time when you 1v3, I hate to say it, even for myself, it's usually against players that are either really impatient or inexperienced, because a lot of the time they do not need to be peeking you one by one, and worst cases, they should just be waiting for the zone to force you out rather than giving you one-on-one gunfights or even a chance to come back. So yes, 1v3s are going to be harder, especially if you don't have map control, but I'd argue 1v3s aren't something that should be happening so frequently and feel like a win condition anyways. You can no longer sit and try and wait and build super energy. You can't just sit and wait for the other team to try and make a mistake or get curious with a sniper or with chaperone or something, I don't know. That being said, I don't think it's impossible. You can work around the objective and try and take different angles while putting pressure and dismantling your enemy team, and you can use the objective to bait enemies out or even watch lanes of where they have to push towards the objective. Using the objective as a, again, powered position and a point to make enemies push, in my opinion, is a good thing and requires a good bit of strategy, and I like that personally. So yes, 1v3s are a lot harder. There will be a lot more pressure during 1v3s, and that can go either way. Pressure to push the zone, or use the zone to put pressure on enemies to push you in a 1v3. I think it's pretty interesting. I think currently, again, a lot of 1v3s come down to you're facing inexperienced players, or just a decent player being lazy or lacking discipline. If you think I'm a decent player, I definitely get lazy and lack discipline. This is me sometimes. Now that I've talked about why I believe we need a zone and the current state of Elim and what this all means, we get get to talk about the actual implementation. We actually got zones in Trials with Trials Labs. However, we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Let's start with talking about the good, because I want to start on a positive note. I loved when the zone was in middle. Yeah, people actually pushed and fought for zone control. Rounds went by quicker, they weren't stalemates. It was a lot of fun. You actually had to contest map control each and every time. It was great. You could do plays like, again, controlling power positions, having good positioning when capping the zone and being the player that wasn't on the zone, for example. I loved the strategy with it. It was awesome. When the zone was in mid, it was like proof of concept for me. I'm like, this is great. I love this. This is incredible. I want to play this so much more. I hope this is how normal Elim is. And a nice touch is that I love the persistent waypoint. Even if we do get a little bit more time, if players prefer that, before the zone actually spawns, I think right now it's 30 seconds. Let's say I went to even 45. I think that persistent waypoint just being there causes players to recognize that at the beginning of the round and have a sense of urgency. They know that they cannot just sit back. They know they can't just play back and play passively. They have to go contest something. It draws players to go and push forward and win map control. Just that small point, I think, was so subtle, yet so good. Zone in mid, persistent waypoint, chef's kiss. It was amazing. I loved it. Let's talk about the not so good now. Wormhaven, contrary, I think, to a lot of people's opinions, I know people don't like this map. It's actually my favorite map, I think, in Destiny 2. And I like it a lot because it's a lot more of an open inside. It has a lot more open angles, more than most Destiny maps, I want to say, even though I wish that glass area wasn't there, but again, still more open than a lot of maps. It has height advantages, and it's multi-level. It has an outside that also looks into the top mid, yet the top mid is still a power position. It is a position you want to fight for. You want to break mid and get that advantage for breaking mid naturally, even without an objective. And again, top mid really gives you a lot of angles and cover to look at a lot of areas on that inside. I love the map. It kind of almost reminds me of a pseudo Halo-ish map. I like it quite a bit. But where am I going with this? I think the zone placement on this map, even when in mid, wasn't good. I don't think that the zone should be on one of the most powerful positions on the map. I think the point of having a zone is to represent that you cannot really truly play it until you have complete map control and express that. So having the zone in a much riskier place, let's think like maybe bottom mid where the heavy kind of spawns, or maybe even outside, would be a lot better, because if you do want to try and go haha fortress up on the zone, get your whole team and pile up on it, it's not really going to work when you're in a position that's open to be shot at from nearly everywhere on the map. And that's the point. You want to have the zone be in a place that is incredibly risky, so it shows that you actually have to fight for the other power positions of the map and win them before being able to safely play the zone. When you have the zone that's already on such a powerful position like on Wormhaven, it starts to make the map or the game mode feel very linear and not nearly as spaced out. Like the map doesn't matter as much. It makes the map feel a lot smaller because you're really only playing for that one really powerful position, mainly at least, because that's where your win condition is. And other positions aren't going to matter as much. Sure, they might still matter a bit and still have an influence, but it's not nearly as necessary as if the zone was in a really vulnerable place that you would need these really good positions before you start playing on the zone, which is again in a very vulnerable place ideally. And having the zone on a already really powerful position does encourage more of that, hey, let's just all hop on here and fortress up because we got the strongest position on the map anyways, and we have the win condition here too. I really can't express this enough, especially on Wormhaven where you have such a distinct height advantage. It's so much harder to challenge a bunch of people on the zone with the cover they have from the box and the height advantage. I really think that the zone placement just wasn't great on this map, and I hope it's better on maps to come. It sucks a bit for me because I think Wormhaven could have been a great map to show this concept on and how good it could be, but in execution, unfortunately, it wasn't great. That leads us to the ugly. When you would cap a zone or win a round in this game mode, it would move the zone to the losing team spawn. Not only immediately does that feel like a catch-up mechanic that you're essentially trying to give another team a freebie, it defeats the point of what the objective is trying to solve about elimination in D2. When you put the zone in a team spawn, even though it was in a little bit more of a vulnerable position, being in the middle of the spawn, at least that was good, it says to that team that they already have control of where they need. Sure, they might want to, in the case of Wormhaven, push up a little bit, play around that glass area and control that ramp area, so at least you're not giving the enemy team a complete free push to the zone cap, but that's as far as you really need to go. You're controlling your main power positions, the top of the ramp, maybe the bottom of the ramp room, and then one person on the zone. It lets people just set up and play and wait for the zone to come up, and hopefully their hold is strong enough that they're going to win. It eliminates the need for them to really push out. It puts an emphasis on the other team that they have to basically retake. They're playing retake off the bat, and the other team that's defending has no reason to use supers off the rip. They have no reason to use any utility to push. They're already in control. They are in the driver's seat off the rip. And while maybe that was the goal of this, maybe it was to make it feel like an attack and defending kind of a thing, I think it defeats the purpose of the kind of gameplay that should be produced out of zone control in Trials, which is teams fighting for mid and a lot of the things that I feel I've explained throughout this video. I feel it eliminates a lot of the decision making with your utility, where you want to push, how you want to play the start of a round, and the pressure needed to push and gain map control. It also kind of eliminates that 30-second neutral phase because one team is spending a lot of the time just trying to get to the other side of the map rather than both teams using that neutral phase as a time to establish map control and contest each other without the zone present. All again while unfortunately feeling like a comeback mechanic. There is barely any pressure on the team that is getting the zone in their spawn, while the other team that just finished winning a round, they should be in a good headspace and they should be feeling like they're in the driver's seat, but they go into the next round not being in the driver's seat after having won, which I think is just a bad feeling in my opinion. So lastly, what would I personally like to see changed? I like to see the zone placements on maps going forward to be in a place that is a lot more vulnerable, out in the open, in an area that you normally really don't want to play in, so that it emphasizes that you need to control the best positions on the map before fully committing to the zone. I'd like to see the zone always in mid, and if there's a worry about the game mode feeling stale when it is always in mid, perhaps change it to different vulnerable places that is equal distance between both of the spawns. So you still have to fight for it, still fight for the prime positions, but have that zone come up in a different place each time that is still in mid or equal distance in a vulnerable area preferably. I do need to mention though that with this, please do not make that random. If it's going to change like that, it needs to be consistent so teams know exactly each round what they're going to be headed towards and the strategy of how they're going to play it. Other than that, I liked it. This is our first try into zone trials and it is just a preview, it's a concept, so I'm not going to be too hypercritical on it. And I think that it's important for us to all realize that it's just concept and testing things out, and I'd like to see Bungie go for this again and again and again and iterate on this multiple times and find a place where everyone's kind of happy with how it performs, it feels exciting, it feels modern, and it's at a good place. So I really don't want to see objectives just go away all at once and be like, nope, that didn't work, that wasn't good. After one test, I hope we see multiple iterations of this, try it out multiple times and different changes and see what sticks best. Anyways, that's a lot of talking that I've done. I swear I don't like to hear my own voice. That's a lot more talking than I've done in a long time, and I'm going to leave you guys now so you don't have to listen to me anymore. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed my opinions. Of course, these are just my opinions and thoughts. They are not to be all and end all. I'll see you guys later. Take it easy.